Hello all and welcome to Frankfurt Auto. Today I'm going to try to explain how an injector works on a gasoline or petrol engine. Okay. So this is a setup from a 4-cylinder multi-port fuel injection system, and it's not much difference. This one is from a V6, same thing, multi-port fuel injection system. So basically what happens is you have a fuel pump. If the fuel pump sits inside the fuel tank, so when you start your car, or it primes for 2 seconds if you keep the ignition on, but when you start your car, the fuel pump starts pumping fuel through the thicker line. It starts pumping fuel through here, and it goes into the inlet of the fuel rail. So this is called a fuel rail. Same thing with this. This is called a fuel rail. So the fuel pump starts pumping the fuel into right here. Okay? So the fuel, it keeps on pumping. The fuel goes into the rail. Okay? It goes into the rail, and then you have a regulator. Regulator is what regulates the pressure. So every vehicle is going to have different pressure. Most of them, they run at about 60-65 pounds per square inch. Okay? On this one, you have a regulator right here. Okay? So you have fuel coming in. So there's your fuel inlet. The fuel comes in, goes through the rail, goes to the regulator, and from the regulator, then it enters the main fuel rail. And all the injectors, they get exact same pressure. Whatever is excess, it goes through the return line. So here's your return line. So there's a return line. In this case, here's the return line. So there's a return line. It comes out of the return line, and it goes back into the tank through this line. The main thing to remember is that throughout this part, this rail right here, the fuel is, let's say this vehicle was running at 60 psi. So the fuel, each injector that is getting is 60 psi. As long as the vehicle is running, they all get exact same pressure. Okay, so the fuel pump, it sits in the tank. So the fuel pump just, when you start the car, it just pumps fuel. So the fuel rail right there, so the fuel keeps going, and the regulator somewhere on the way here is what regulates the pressure. So the blue line is representing the fuel going in, and the fuel goes into the injector. So an injector is actually just a simple coil or a solenoid operated valve. When it gets negative and positive, so it gets two wires come to it. When it gets negative and positive, the solenoid opens and it sprays fuel from the bottom. Okay, so that's where the fuel comes out, that tiny hole there. So some of the parts of the injector, so you have the outer body of the injector. Okay, you have the magnet, it's an electromagnet. That's what triggers when you get negative and positive coming to it. Okay, you have the passages. I'll talk about that in a minute. You have a return spring. Return spring is what closes the injector. Okay, it pushes down, and you have the needle valve, and this is where the fuel comes out. So basically, the fuel keeps whatever pressure you have in the line, whatever pressure you have regulated by the regulator or in the fuel rail, it's the same pressure. The fuel stays inside the injector. So the whole cavity here, this whole cavity, it stays filled with fuel. So as we said, if it's 60 psi, you'll have 60 psi pressure in here too. As soon as the fuel injection or the injector gets triggered, the electromagnet lifts this pintle or the needle valve, this red part here. This gets lifted up. The fuel that is, all the fuel that is sitting here sprays out, and it keeps spraying the same amount until the spring pushes the needle valve down. Okay, so, and the amount of time the injector is open, the amount of time this needle valve is up, that's called injector pulse width. So here I have a cutout of an injector. Okay, so same thing what you have seen on the PowerPoint slideshow. We have electromagnet right here. We have the needle valve, which is right here. The power comes to the injector right from the wires, which are right here. Okay, that's what triggers the injector. The fuel rail is on the top, so the fuel rail is right here. The fuel enters through the rail into the injector. This whole cavity here, it stays filled with fuel. So everything around the injector right here, this whole cavity stays filled with the fuel. When the injector gets triggered, this needle valve, it lifts up. The electromagnet here triggers it, or it gets triggered, electromagnet pulls this needle valve up, and the fuel gets sprayed right through the bottom here. As soon as there is no power to the injector, there's a spring that sits here, it pushes the needle valve down, closing the port, so nothing comes out from the bottom of the injector. So I have another injector right here, so nothing comes out from the bottom. So let's talk about what controls how long the injector is opening and when is the injector opening. So what happens is when your car is running, your camshaft is spinning, the cam sensor, it picks a signal. So it's another magnet, it picks a signal from the camshaft, it sends it to the ECM, electronic control module, or the car computer, and the car computer basically decides the injector when it opens with the help of cam sensor. Okay, so the signal goes from the cam sensor to ECM. The ECM sends a signal to the injector, and the injector sprays fuel. The duration the fuel is being sprayed, as I said, it's called injector pulse width. So here is another injector that I've taken apart. So here's a needle valve. So the fuel actually comes out of right through here. A needle valve is what opens and closes it, opens and closes the port. This whole cavity right here, it stays filled with the fuel. The spring is right here that closes the injector. Okay, it goes on the top, and then you have the rest of the injector. The fuel enters through the top, comes out here, and this thing attaches right here. I'm going to show you the injector pulse width, or injector pulsing, with the help of injector tester. On average, if your car is running at about 1000 RPMs, the injector pulses at about 3 to 5 milliseconds. So this is the plug that comes from ECU or ECM, or the car computer, and this is the one that brings the signal to the injector, and it just gets connected to the injector. It's just got 2 wires coming to it. So this is a special test light. You can check the injector pulse with this, and I'm going to show you how to do that with the node lights as well. So that just shows the power is on. So when it gets positive here, the red light goes on. So there's another red light, okay, right here. You can see that red light. And when that signal is negative, that same light goes green. So that's getting a negative signal. That is getting a positive signal. Okay. So when you have your ignition on, one side gets positive, it gets that from the battery side or the ignition switch, and the other side stays positive as well because your car is not running. It's just you got the ignition on. So that comes through, the second side comes through the ECU or ECM. The one side is always positive. But when you trigger it, so I have this set to 5 milliseconds. Okay, so when I trigger, so this stays positive. The other side, you will see that it will fluctuate between negative and positive. And that fluctuation every time that turns green and red, that's when the fuel injector is opening and closing. So see how fast that is fluctuating? So that's about 5 milliseconds. That's how fast the injector pulsates when it's idling at about 1000 RPMs. So there it is at 5 milliseconds. This is 10 milliseconds. Okay? And this is just on. Okay? So again, 10 milliseconds. Okay? And then you have 5 milliseconds. Okay? So same thing can be achieved by using these node lights. Okay, so this is a complete set. It's for different vehicles. So you can use these node lights to check if there's injector pulse or not. So I have one node light hooked up to the same injector tester. So if I press at 5 millisecond, it happens pretty quick. I'm not sure if you can see the fluctuation on the video or not. Okay, so that's at 5 millisecond. This is at 10 millisecond. So I have an injector hooked up to the same jig, to the injector tester. So this is how fast it pulses. Actually, you can listen to it with a stethoscope too, but I'm sure that you can listen to this. Let me try this. So that's at 5 millisecond. I'm going to try this again. Okay, I'm going to try that at 10 millisecond. And you can see how fast it pulsates. So I put this setup together where we're going to say that this is our fuel pump. I'm just pressurizing, so here's a fuel rail. So I'm just pressurizing the injector with something, which I'm using a syringe, pretending that it's a fuel pump. On the other side, for the signal, we have the wire coming from our ECM, which is actually just an injector tester. So if I pressurize the system, and I trigger it, you can see the fuel getting sprayed. Okay, so I still have the pressure, system is still pressurized. Where's my injector? Right here. So here's my injector. I keep the system pressurized. I press the trigger, and the injector sprays. Okay, and that's how a simple injector works. Once again, thank you for supporting our channel. If you're curious about other automotive related topics, please visit our website, sites.google.com/view Frank Hurt Auto. It's all lowercase. Thank you again.